fashion. And that is not necessarily the same as what you would find as a good in a Western society. What India holds out as good and normative behavior could still be unique. And it is that which I will try and very quickly in the next few minutes explore to best of my understanding as to what is that cultural trait, that feature which is distinct, which is normatively laid down by the society, and which has a relevance in the context of managerial excellence. After all, this is the whole purpose of this research, is to see how you can draw lessons and draw values from the Indian ethos to make it relevant and make it a successful model for business excellence. I'd like to deal with this in 4 parts. The first part relates to the attitude of management to results. After all, it's the results, the outcome that matter most in the management situation. And what has been the Indian ethos in relation to the outcome and the results of the management process? I've had the privilege of sitting on many juries for selection of outstanding business leader for one award or the other, both India and globally. And invariably, we have talked about metrics relating to the business outcomes. Return on capital employed, market cap increases, profitability, market share improvements. Indeed, these are very strong physical kind of metrics which are in the public domain and therefore easy to pick. There has hardly been any discussion in terms of the means which were adopted to achieve these results. They have not been a part of the reckoning when you want to celebrate excellence in leadership. And that's when you begin to think that is there another way that India has looked at this? Then it strikes you that right through the society, the Indian society normatively has defined the means to an end as important as the end itself, if not even more important. Nobody demonstrated this more effectively than Mahatma Gandhi. You cannot get away from quoting Gandhiji when you're talking about management principles, because all that he did in managing this huge movement to produce an end result, which is in the form of not merely political freedom, a social freedom as well. Quite often I've wondered whether his political struggle was a means for the purpose of attaining a social freedom rather than for political freedom. And if you stop and think, Gandhiji never said that I will have this result coming in this time target. I mean, all of us are, as management students, are used to saying, who will do what is the time period, what's the time target, what's the end result. He never put a time target for that. Because to him, means were important. If you follow the principles of Dharma, if the dharmic route is what you follow, results have to come. There will be obstacles. But those obstacles will melt away, you will have a sustainable result coming in. Not any result. Cut to chase in a management concept, in an organizational context. We have seen many organizations in the history of the last 40, 50 years, many organizations showing stellar performances for a few years. A chief executive who manages to have stellar performance for a few years, but not necessarily in a sustainable fashion. We've seen them crumble because the means adopted have not been sustainable. It's not merely the question of inflating sales, somehow torturing an accounting policy to show results. It's not just those. It is far more than that. It is in terms of building an organization to be capable of giving sustained results year after year. That is when you begin to say, that's management excellence. Not a one-off time period, not for a few years when you have a stellar performance only to go down. It's your ability to infuse a spirit of excellence, which is sustainable over a period of time. That's truly the excellence, and that's means to an end. That is looking at how do you get your results? What are the dharmic means that you employ for the purpose of getting results? And this message and this relevance of this means came to me personally very strongly in the 90s, early 90s, when the entire auto industry understood that it was now time for us now to make another step change in terms of the quality of our products, because we are facing the specter of the market opening up, competition coming in. So the awakening came sometime in the 80s and the 90s, when all of us said that we've got to do something to improve the quality of our output, quality of our organization significantly. And all of us ran to the Japanese. As all of you know, the Japanese Toyota management systems, the total quality management systems, which had roots in Japan. It's another matter that the Japanese themselves drew inspiration from an American journal who was frustrated with the fact that the American auto industry was not listening to him about the quality messages that he was giving, and came to Japan and spoke to Toyota, and Toyota therefore took it up along with all the others and then built this huge quality movement. And when we brought this quality gurus to our shop floors, we began to listen to them, all that they were saying was, put the processes in place, set your goals, put the processes, and have ruthless adherence to these processes. Management's task is to make sure that you have this ruthless adherence to the process, not 99%, 100% adherence to the process. And if you do that, inequality will happen. It's because you don't adhere to the process. It's because you don't have the process controls in place. That's why you're compromising the output quality. So the whole meaning of the Indian ethos in saying means are very important. Follow the dharmic principles in your life, and the end result of enrichment of your life will happen by itself. As applicated to the management philosophy to say, make the right kind of processes, follow the right kind of routes, and then the quality will follow, managerial excellence will follow, organizational results will follow. That is, to my mind, an extremely unique Indian contribution to the thought of managerial excellence. The second attribute is the attitude that Indians have always had towards fellow employees, co-workers. At the beginning, you had both the speakers say that when there is a death, you begin to see that you're relating to that as though it is a part of a familial field. Now, this is not indoctrinated. People have come together from different parts of this country. You've all been here maybe for a year or two as students, some of you in faculty maybe a few years. But you already have the spirit of family. If there is some tragic event happening here, you feel the pain. And I feel the pain when I come here. That's the feeling of parivar we've always had. It was not at all very uncommon. If you looked at the histories of the large groups, successful Indian groups in the 40s, 50s, 60s and so on, you would find that the owner would make sure that one of the workers, if they had a worker had a marriage in the family, the owner would make sure that the marriage is performed. They will all be there. If there's a death in the family, the owner's family will be there. It was a part of a familial spirit that the owners had. This is a very unique part of the Indian ethos. As distinguished from the Western notion of looking at co-workers as merely people who come together between 9 and 5, today the West is realizing this principle. In fact, you have now outbound programs happening. You've got people now going out to say, trust in your colleagues, and look backward and fall off the cliff, and make sure that you trust your colleagues without standing at the bottom behold you. And in fact, I was extremely amused to read the recent business article in one of the magazines which talked about bringing in the family spirit in an organization. And you're conducting courses for this. This has been a part of our ethos, to say that we are paridars. Co-workers are being treated not as people who come together for a certain purpose, for a certain time period, but you have the bonding. Bonding is now being discovered as a new ethos. And I must say, that's being discovered at the time that we are losing this concept of bonding in the family spirit and our own organizations. That stood out because there's an alignment that is already necessary. That alignment has been a precondition for the purpose of getting results. I was once talking to a young man whom I had recommended for a job in one of the large South Indian family groups. This boy was from the village, and I had sent him to this group, and I spoke to the chairman of this group and said, here's a young boy who has come from the village, seems to be bright, so would you like to give him a job? And he obliged, and he got a job. And 2 months later, this boy walked in. He was from a very poor family. He walked into my home. So I asked him, how's the job? He said, oh, they're excellent idlis and pongal in the canteen. I said, idiot, I wanted you to tell me what is the job. But you see, I realized that this group had managed to have this kind of a bonding with the people, the parental attitude to its workers, because they ensured that they had good breakfast. Before they came into work, they had good breakfast, they were taken care of. And most of them came from villages. Now, today there is a debate whether parental attitude is right, the parent-child relationship is right, should it not be an adult-to-adult relationship. But we have succeeded in building the parental attitude, the parent-to-child relationship in dealing with co-workers at the managerial level. And that's successful. And this has resulted in a great deal of loyalty. We lost the script somewhere. In the last 30, 40 years, we lost the script. And that is when we have seen politics into the organization. That is when we have seen a lot of violence, militant unions, and a certain lack of moral, even on the part of the ownership and management, to deal with the situation. But let's remember, what the Indian society has always celebrated is this fact of having a familial, a parental attitude towards co-workers. The third feature is the attitude towards work and the workplace. The Western model today, which we have, the Indian companies have so readily accepted today, is an attitude where you have a contract between a manager, a leader, and the organization. I worked with you for 3 years, 3 months notice period. What will you give me by way of ESOP? But I spent a lot of time in the last few years recruiting chief executives for some of my good companies, and I've often been struck with the fact that a lot of time gets spent in negotiating what brand of a car this person should have. Now, this is a very significant change in the way that today leadership is looking at, managers are looking at the contract with the organization. Loyalty is not necessarily a virtue today. If you ask young people, I don't think young people believe that loyalty to an organization is a great virtue. The Oriental thinking was different. Japan believed in lifetime employment. They perhaps now have to rethink about this, but this is their ethos. The Japanese ethos was not to let somebody go, because they felt that it is the responsibility of the management and the ownership to ensure that they have a viable job with the organization. Now, to us, workplace is not merely a place of work, but it's a place of worship. All of us take for granted the celebration of the Ayuda Puja. I don't know how it is celebrated in Karnataka, but on Ayuda Puja day that you put all the books on the computers and everything else that you can look at and throw flowers at this. Well, this may be a ritual. But as Dr. Bhatt is saying, look at the substance of the ritual. The substance of the ritual is to say that you have to worship your place. You have to worship the workplace, because this is, and we worship everything. We worship the trees and the plants and the birds and the animals, and so worship comes naturally to us. It is a part of our Indian ethos to look at divinity, presence of divinity in everything that we interact with. And therefore it comes naturally to us to go and put flowers on a computer. And it is the substance of this feeling that here is a place where we are indebted to this organization collectively for giving us this opportunity to serve. That's been a very strong Indian ethos. I had a very convoluted example, manifestation of this value. Way back in my career, I had to look after a small factory which was lying in the remote corner in the north, and it just happened that the factory accountant there, who was a very veritable gentleman, a very respected person, he was found to be taking away money through forged checks from a supplier's account. So when the whole thing unraveled and the investigation was over, I asked him, I said, I'm intrigued by one thing. I'm of course shocked by the fact that there is such a respected person as you are, a senior person, you resorted to this, which is absolutely devastating to me. But more than that, I'm intrigued by the fact that you had this convoluted way of creating another account in the name of the supplier and stealing from the account when you could have stolen money from the company's account. And when I said this, he was shocked. He said, how can you even say this? Because the company is my another. I would not think of stealing from the company. Yeah, stealing from the supplier's account. This is a convoluted way of still having this very strongly embedded view that plays a role. This is the in fact, I still have people in my organization, in the factories. I still find people when they enter the factory, they bow down and show the respects. That's a very different kind of an ethos, which is not what you would find in the Western. And we have lost the plot again here. We need to rediscover to say, how do we bring in this ethos back? And it's not difficult. The Japanese have their company song, for example. And it's a part of the ritual. Every day, all the Japanese workers, before they enter the factory, have the company song. Celebrating an Ayuda Puja is one way of bringing on this feeling of worship. So this is, to my mind, a very important attribute. The last feature, which I think distinguishes the Indian ethos, is the attitude to governance. This, to my mind, is one of the most outstanding contributions of the Indian society to the body of knowledge relating to governance. The earliest form of business in India is the joint Hindu family. And the joint Hindu family was being managed by the most senior male member of the family. And he was called Karta. What is a Karta? The Karta is nothing but an abbreviated form of Dharma Karta. He's a trustee. The entire ethos of looking at this ownership as trusteeship. You hold these powers, and you hold the power to manage and own and manage these properties as a trustee for the stakeholders, in this case the other members of the family. The concept of trusteeship, again, which is emphasized by Gandhiji, that is what is now being rediscovered by the Western world in terms of corporate governance. Today, when you're talking about corporate governance in the context of stakeholders, all that we're saying is that shareholders, or the dominant shareholders who also happen to have the reins of management in their hands, are there only to ensure that they have they ensure a fair play and take the interest of the other shareholders, other stakeholders. So this is the concept of trusteeship is what is central to the theme of corporate governance today. Corporate governance is not about prescription of number of independent directors that you have or how many times they open their mouth. It is about the concept of having the trusteeship principle. I had an extremely revealing understanding of what this means. In Ashok Leyland, the company was founded by a person called Raghunandan Saran way back in 1948. He died a few years later in an airplane accident, and his wife, again a very educated lady, she used to be the Vice Chancellor of the Lahore University. She was on our board, Mrs. Rakshasara. And during the years that I was a finance director at that time, and this is again way back in the 70s, late 70s, for 4 or 5 years when I was there, and when she was there at the board, I never heard her say anything at the board meeting. And I often used to think, I mean, I was again young and therefore not very mature, and I'm thinking, I'm saying, why would this lady be there at the board and not say a word about anything? She would never say anything. Until one day, when we had a particular contract with an overseas customer, we had some difficulty with the contract, and there was a huge claim. And I was explaining to the board that we were very strong legally, and this claim is something that we can legally defend, and we will not have any provisions for it. And at that time, for the first time I heard her in 4 years, that lady opened her mouth and said, "Tell me, did the customer believe that you had this right at the time that you wrote this contract?" I said, "I can't say that." "So you think therefore he would feel deceived?" I said, "Maybe." Then she said, "No, right on." Now that was a very defining moment, because she did not have any, she was a part owner, she had no compunction about taking a hit, and she was not standing on legal rights. She said, this is the value. If you're dealing with your customers and your dealers, and you will let them believe that they have a right, or they don't know that you have a right, hold on to it. And that, to my mind, is governance. This is governance all about setting values about how you deal with the stakeholders. And that's the concept of trusteeship that I think Indian ethos has constantly underscored.